This is World News Program coming to you live from Algiers with me, Mariam Zian, to the headlines. After decades of stagnation, Algeria's parliament unanimously approves a law criminalizing French colonialism, in a move described as a historic moment to enshrine historical truth and protect the national memory. In developments in Libya, Turkey announces that the black box of the aircraft carrying the Army Chief of Staff will be analyzed in a neutral country as Libya dispatches a delegation to Ankara and declares 3 days of national mourning. In Gaza, casualties are reported in Israeli airstrikes across the Strip. Civil defense teams recover dozens of bodies amid warnings of a severe food security crisis. The details of your nightly news, and at the outset, Algeria's National People's Assembly unanimously approved a law criminalizing French colonialism during a session chaired by Speaker Ibrahim Boughali with government members present. The law, comprising 5 chapters and 27 articles, outlines France's responsibility for colonial crimes, establishes mechanisms for recognition and apology, criminalizes glorifying colonialism, and aims to safeguard Algeria's national memory while pursuing historical justice.
طبقا لأحكام المواد 32 33 35 34.
In accordance with the provisions of Articles 32, 33, 34, 35, and 36 of Organic Law number 1612, which defines the organization of National People's Assembly and the Council of the Nation, their functions as well as the functional relations between them and with the government, amended and supplemented. I propose a law on criminalizing the French colonialism in Algeria and submitted it entirely to a vote. I consider that the National People's Assembly has unanimously voted in favor of the full draft law criminalizing the French colonialism in Algeria.
يتعلق بتجريم الاستعمار الفرنسي بالجزائر بكامله.
The head of Algeria's Committee for History and Memory, Mohamed Lahsen Zghidi, affirmed that the Algerian state will remain faithful to its principles of opposing colonialism wherever it exists. Speaking before Algeria's National People's Assembly at the opening of the voting session on the proposed law criminalizing French colonialism, Zghidi stressed that a state which expelled colonialism from its land is now criminalizing it through its parliament, thereby affirming that Algeria is a school of liberation for the entire world.
It is a loyal parliamentary response from the children of independence to say to the enemies of Algeria and to the whole world that the spirit of November and the seed of November will not die and will not fade away until the end of times. This is an oath and a pledge. We also say to those who introduced and glorified occupation and colonialism in 2004 in their parliament that the children of November came today to say to those who glorified colonialism, you are on the margin of history. We are here today, the grandchildren of martyrs, the children of martyrs, the symbol of resistance, the schools of liberation across the world, to say to the world that whoever raises this flag will not glorify colonialism, but will fight colonialism wherever it is and wherever it might be.
In the same context, the head of Algeria's Committee for History and Memory called on parliaments of Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and other regions to follow the example of the Algerian parliament by criminalizing colonialism, noting that just as Algeria was once a locomotive of liberation, it will also be a locomotive of progress and enlightenment.
We expect African parliaments, we expect parliaments in the Caribbean, we expect parliaments in Asia, we expect Arab parliaments to have the courage of the Algerians, to have this courage and to condemn colonialism. And for this reason, gentlemen, Algeria was the locomotive of liberation and will remain the locomotive of enlightenment, the locomotive of progress, and the locomotive of resistance. Thank you, I say to you, thank you for this honor.
Algeria's Minister of Mujahideen and Rights Holders Abdelmalek Tashrif described the proposed law criminalizing French colonialism as crucial for establishing historical truth, preserving national memory, and ensuring Algerians can document their history objectively. Speaking during Wednesday's voting session at the National People's Assembly, he said the law supports a national process to consolidate Algeria's historical references and stressed that France must acknowledge its colonial crimes and issue an official apology.
We support the endorsement of a draft law aimed at enshrining historical truth, preserving national memory and guaranteeing the Algerian people's right to document their history objectively and far from any denial or distortion. This law truly reflects the soul of the Algerian nation, given that French colonialism committed serious violations throughout its presence on our land. The very least we can do, the duty of memory and conscience, the duty of justice, and the duty to respect human rights and the rights of peoples, require that those who perpetrated these crimes bear full historical responsibility, acknowledge their actions, and offer an apology in accordance with the provisions of this law.
And the unanimous approval by the Algerian National People's Assembly of a draft law criminalizing French colonialism in Algeria, in line of the principles of international law, constitute a significant step and a real milestone in the process of preserving national memory and prosecuting the occupier for the various crimes it committed during 132 years of barbaric war and genocide. Mohammed Khatil reports.
أعتبر أن المجلس الشعبي الوطني قد صوت بالإجماع على اقتراح قانون يتعلق بتجريم الاستعمار الفرنسي بالجزائر بكامله.
Unanimously and in a clear and unequivocal voice, chanting the French occupation is an imprescriptible state crime. The members of the Algerian National People's Assembly voted in favor of a historic and unprecedented draft law criminalizing French colonialism. This consensus affirms the Algerian state and people's commitment to preserving and defending the memory file, in fulfillment of the martyrs' eternal message, by placing it at the heart of their concerns, far from forgetting or denial. France's colonial record is full of violations and crimes, committed with premeditation and in a deliberate way, ranging from genocide, burning, killing, and forced displacement to attempts to obliterate the people's identity, in addition to the crimes of nuclear explosions that turned the bodies of Algerians, their land, and their desert into an experiments laboratory, and whose nefarious repercussions and devastating effects are still visible in the bodies of innocent Algerians. The articles and clauses of the law criminalizing colonialism are not limited to condemning the occupier and compelling it to recognize its crimes and exactions against Algeria and the Algerian people, but rather aim to expose the maneuvers of successive French governments, which thought that time would be able to delete the pages of their tarnished history full of every kind of hideous and heinous crimes.
And more insights into Algeria's newly approved draft law criminalizing French colonialism with Hussam Berkan, journalist at Al24 News. He's here with us tonight in the studio. Thank you for joining us, Hussam.
Thanks for having me, Maria.
Thank you. So Algeria's parliament has unanimously approved the draft law criminalizing French colonial rule. Can you break down this law, what it covers, and how it addresses the crimes committed during the colonial rule?
First of all, Maria, before answering your question, I think we should emphasize on a very important fact, which is that, as we've seen in the news package, that the law has been passed unanimously in the parliament. Mm-hmm. So I want to focus on the fact that this law is it's not an attempt to revive historical or past wounds, or it's an attempt, for vengeance, but it's purely the will of the Algerian people. Mm-hmm. And it's the Algerian state, a sovereign state, exercising its sovereignty. We should agree on this, because when we talk about the parliament passing this unanimously, the parliament is the representative of the people, and the Algerian people decided that we should pass a law that criminalize the colonial past or the colonial era. Super important to focus on this, because the Algerian people, until now, they are carrying the consequences of 130 years of brutal colonialism. We're talking about millions of martyrs. We're talking about villages that were erased from existence. They've been tribes that were wiped out from existence. And until now, the Algerian people have been suffering from the consequences or repercussions of this colonialism for generations. There is not a single Algerian family without a martyr in their family, which is super important. So what is going on now is us honoring the sacrifices of the Algerian people. And it's not even a rhetoric, like an emotional claim. It's historical facts. These are historical facts that we should frame and put them in a legal framework. Just like to establish this before even answering your question, Maria. So coming back to the law that was passed, exactly, unanimously. It's basically focusing on three principal aspects. The first one is to legally frame the French colonial act as what we call a state crime. This is super important. It is a state crime that France needs to take full responsibility, acknowledge the crimes of the past, and take and bear full responsibility of these crimes. When we talk about these crimes, we're talking about extrajudicial killings, torture, forced displacements, collective punishments, and most importantly, the nuclear test. Super important to consider this to be a state crime and for France to take full responsibility. The second pillar is what we call, Miriam, the no statute of limitation. You know, Miriam, in international law, you know, crimes like international crimes or crimes against humanity, they have this very specific feature, which is
the act.
The no limitation statute, or the no statute limitation, which means that these crimes cannot be erased or removed by the passage of time. You got it? So this is super important.
There is no time limit for the crimes.
No time limit for these crimes. France needs to take full responsibility of these crimes, and there is no time limit for that. And the third aspect, Mariam, that we should emphasize on is to protect the Algerian national memory and criminalizing three aspects. Criminalizing, justifying, denying, or glorifying colonialism.
Yes.
Why is this important? In order to protect the Algerian memory from distortion and for the next future generations to have the Algerian memory as it is, as accurate as possible. Just like to summarize everything, or to sum it up, Miriam, this is not a mere symbolic act, but it's a way to protect our memory, our national memory, and put it in place and as accurately as possible in a legal framework.
It is to protect our national memory. Hussam, it is a landmark measure aimed at preserving national memory. You just stated how important it is. But can you tell us how, again, important it is for historical accountability?
Okay, Miriam, you know that we've been hearing for years from French side that we need to move forward. We need to go toward reconciliation.
Like it's something from the past.
Exactly. We need to go to reconciliation. And the problem here is that we cannot go to reconciliation and to move forward if you're refusing to take full responsibility, acknowledge the crimes, and take full responsibility of your colonial past. How can you talk about moving forward without even you acknowledging and taking full responsibility? This is number one. There were some attempts to move forward. One of the most important is, the committee that we've been talking about, which is like the joint Algerian-French history committee, with gathering Algerian and the French historians together and same table, trying to work on a common narrative, common history.
Which is an effort.
It is a positive effort, but the problem here, how can you work on a common narrative and common history while denying and refusing to acknowledge the very crimes that we're working on? Like, it doesn't make sense. This is why it's super important for us to emphasize on the fact that recognition must come before dialogue and responsibility must come before reconciliation.
And today, Hussam, why does this law matter?
That is a very interesting question that we should emphasize on, and I want to tackle it from a different angle, which is we're noticing in Europe currently the rise of the far right, and most importantly in France. And the problem is that the far right in France currently is using our memory. They're using their brutal colonial past for political gains, which is something that is unacceptable. They're using them, sometimes denying the crimes, sometimes even glorifying their crimes, just to play with the emotions of their for electoral gains, and it's something that we cannot accept. And I think that this law came in time to draw a red line. That our history is a red line. You cannot use the sacrifices of millions of people.
The blood of our martyrs.
Exactly, for mere political gains. This is unacceptable. And one aspect also that I wanted to focus on, Miriam, is that, can you imagine that in 2005, there was a law that passed in the French parliament that actually imposed on schools to educate their people in their curriculum the positive, what they call, the so-called, the positive aspect of colonialism, which is nonsense. Imagine the consequences of the Algerian diaspora in France, our dear Algerians living in France, being educated in false history. That is not acceptable, and this is why this law is super, super important. As I said, it draws a red line that to protect our history, and not only for our current generation, but for the future generations, and put it in a legal framework. Only one last thing, Miriam, that I wanted to conclude this with, which is that there were multiple attempts to, make this division between the different generations in order for us not to learn about our history, in order for us to forget the history. I just want to emphasize from this podium that we did not forget. We are not forgetting, and we will never forget. We will never forget the crimes committed by the French brutal colonialism. But most importantly, we will never forget the sacrifices of millions of people. Those millions of sacrifices that, thanks to them, we are here in this very studio defending our cause, defending our dear Algeria.
Thank you very much, Hussam, for your insights and time.
Thank you.
And moving on to the rest of our news, Algeria has emphasized the need to adhere to the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter, particularly respecting state sovereignty and refraining from the use of force. Speaking before the UN Security Council during a session on Venezuela on Tuesday, Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Ben Jama, stressed that Algeria's position calls primarily for restraint from all parties.
It is paramount in this regard to recall Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter, which states, and I quote, all members shall refrain in their international relations for the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner and consistent with the purposes of the United Nations. These principles are not merely aspirational. They constitute binding obligations under international law and frame our collective responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security.
And you have followed in our headlines, Turkish authorities announced that the black box from the Libyan plane that crashed Tuesday evening near Ankara, killing everyone on board, including Libya's Chief of Staff Mohammed Ali al-Haddad and several of his aides, will be analyzed in a neutral country yet to be determined. In a tweet on X on Wednesday, Turkish Transport Minister Abdul Qadir Ural said that the analysis of the flight data and cockpit voice recorders will determine the cause of the crash and that it will be conducted in a neutral country following an initial inspection.
Enkaz alanında saat
The aircraft's voice recorder was found at the wreckage site at 2:45 and the black box at 3:20. The examination and evaluation processes for these have been initiated by the relevant committees. Additionally, a 14-person delegation from the Libyan Ministry of Defense, including 5 relatives of those who lost their lives, and an 8-person delegation from the Libyan Ministry of Interior, a total of 22 Libyan personnel, have arrived in Ankara.
And Turkey revealed that the private plane carrying Libya's Chief of Staff under the internationally recognized Government of National Unity requested an emergency landing due to an electrical malfunction before crashing on Tuesday. Turkish Presidential Communications Director Burhanettin Duran said on X that the aircraft carrying General Haddad, 4 of his companions and 3 crew members reported an emergency to air traffic control due to an electrical failure and requested an emergency landing. Libya's Presidential Council and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces Mohammed al-Manfi has declared 3 days of national mourning with flags lowered at all state institutions and military units. In a statement on Tuesday evening, al-Manfi offered his condolences to the Libyan people over the tragic loss of Chief of Staff General Mohammed Ali al-Haddad, a member of the 5+5 military committee, Chief of Army Staff Major General al-Fituri Khalifa Arbalil, Director of the War Industry Department Brigadier General Mahmoud al-Qattawi, and their companions, following a devastating accident on their return to the capital Tripoli from an official mission in Turkey. Moving on to developments in occupied Palestine. A Palestinian was killed and several others were injured on Wednesday by Israeli forces in the Jabalia area in northern Gaza. The incidents coincided with Israeli airstrikes and gunfire across Gaza City, Khan Yunis, Rafah, and the Bureij refugee camp. WHO warns that over 100,000 children and 37,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women in Gaza are at risk of severe malnutrition by April 2026. The organization added that more than 1 million Palestinians in the enclave face acute food insecurity until mid-April 2026, warning that renewed hostilities or halt in aid could put the entire Gaza Strip at risk of famine within months. And Belgium joins South Africa's lawsuit against Israel over alleged genocide in Gaza. The UN's highest judicial body said that Belgium has officially filed to intervene in the case under Article 63 of the ICJ statute. Brussels will focus on interpreting the intent to commit genocide as outlined in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. In other news, Ukrainian authorities declared a state of maximum alert early Wednesday across Kiev and the entire country. Media sources reported that sirens sounded from the early hours in anticipation of possible Russian airstrikes on the capital. Military leaders in regional areas urge all Ukrainians to heed all the warnings and remain in shelters until the air alert is lifted. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed his readiness to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump to discuss sensitive issues in any peace agreement with Russia, including territorial control. In statements released by his office on Wednesday, Zelensky said Ukraine and the United States are close to finalizing a 20-point framework aimed at ending the war, describing the document as a political basis involving Ukraine, the U.S., Europe, and Russia. The Kremlin said that all key aspects of Russia's position on a settlement in Ukraine are well known to the United States, noting that Moscow will continue its communications with Washington in the near future. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters on Wednesday that Russia will shape its position on the Ukraine settlement process based on information provided by presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev, who submitted a detailed report to President Vladimir Putin on the results of his recent talks in the U.S. The United States and Iran exchanged sharp criticism at the UN Security Council over the conditions for reviving nuclear talks. At an open Security Council session on Tuesday reviewing the implementation of the Resolution 2231, which endorsed the Iran nuclear deal, U.S. Deputy Special Representative to the Middle East Morgan Ortagus said that Washington remains ready for official talks with Iran, but only if Tehran is prepared for direct and substantive dialogue. And Iran's UN Ambassador Amir Saeed Iravani said that the U.S. is not seeking fair negotiations by insisting on preventing any uranium enrichment, emphasizing that this violates Tehran's rights as a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And to end on a lighter note, in sports, Algeria kicked off their 2025 Africa Cup of Nations tournament with a deserved 3-0 victory over Sudan. The Greens got off to a flying start, with captain Riyad Mahrez scoring in the second minute and adding a second in the 61st. Substitute Ibrahim Maza sealed the 3-1 win in the 85th minute, and Algeria now tops Group E on goal difference after Burkina Faso beat Equatorial Guinea 2-1. And that's it for tonight's program. Thanks for watching and have a great night.